Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
The King's Speech in Washington. Welcome to the Tuesday edition as King Charles prepares to address a joint session of Congress just a couple of hours from now following a royal visit to the White House. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington with big questions, Kailey, about to what extent the king might go to in acknowledging geopolitics today.
Yeah, typically there is some separation between the monarchy and everyday politics, but at a moment like this one, especially as we're seeing a fracture in what has been described as the special relationship between the U.S. and U.K. politically, how is the king potentially going to talk about that in veiled terms, perhaps, when he addresses Congress later this afternoon ahead of his state dinner at the White House this evening? A lot of pomp and circumstance taking place, which we know President Trump tends to be a fan of.
That was quite the arrival ceremony this morning on the South Lawn for sure. And we're going to have the latest on this from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. She's at the White House, and we're going to talk to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, who has breaking news and an important story that's going to shake the world of AI when this is released just a couple of moments from now. Kailey, we've got a busy hour ahead.
Yeah, and it's AI and demand for it and concerns about it that's shaking markets today. You're seeing that with some serious downward pressure in the tech space. So let's get a check on that now as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Kailey. Indeed, the Dow higher, S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all trading lower. We are looking at a sell-off in tech giants. Let's get right to the numbers here because we've got NASDAQ lower now by 293 points, down 1.2%. NASDAQ 100 index down 1.3%. All of this with the S&P down 48, drop there of 0.7%. The Dow, though, holding on to a gain right now of 25 points, up by about 0.1%. Concerns are resurfacing over whether vast investments in AI will pay off. The VIX below 19, the 10-year 4.35%, with the 2-year 3.83%. Gold down $88 the ounce to $45.93, drop there of 1.9%. And a surge in crude. We're off session highs, but still looking at WTI $99.29 a barrel, up 3%. Brent $110.44, up now by 2%. The United Arab Emirates is leaving OPEC, dealing a blow to the group and its leader, Saudi Arabia, as the global oil industry grapples with the massive supply disruption caused by the Iran war. We are seeing oil majors in the U.S. trade higher. ExxonMobil up 2.2%. Chevron now higher as well by 2.2%. ConocoPhillips up by just about 1.7%. So again, recapping here, the Dow higher, S&P, NASDAQ both declining. NASDAQ 100 index down 1.3%. S&P right now down by 0.7%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. As Charlie was just running us through, it's another day of OpenAI being big news and a big driver in these markets. After yesterday, of course, we got the news that Microsoft agreed to drop its exclusive rights to resell OpenAI products. And one day later, we have some news that Amazon is going to jump in now that exclusivity has been waived. This is reporting that just crossed the wire from our very own Ed Ludlow, the co-host of Bloomberg Tech, and he's joining us now here on Bloomberg TV and radio. So, Ed, walk us through what Amazon AWS specifically is going to do here and what the CEO told you.
Yeah, what they're specifically going to do is make OpenAI's frontier models, latest models, available on AWS. AWS is the #1 cloud computing provider by some distance in the world. But the story is they were late to the game. You know, Microsoft made a very early play to get in with OpenAI as an investor, as a technology partner. And AWS kind of waited 3 years to really try and catch up. You're right, the exclusivity of Microsoft ended, and Amazon has wasted no time, though this was the piece of news that was hiding in plain sight. Here's what AWS CEO Mark Garman told me.
Well, we're quite excited about the partnership that we're announcing with them today. For a long time, when we built Amazon Bedrock as a way for our customers to access frontier models and access AI models, we've always started with the position that we wanted to offer choice, and we wanted to offer all of the best models available out there. And today we're excited to be bringing OpenAI into Bedrock. I think it's something that our customers have asked for a really long time.
And we're talking specifically about frontier models, not just open-weighted models, which was
that's right. We've had open-weight models for a while, but yes, this is the frontier model. So starting in preview today, we have OpenAI's Model 5.4 and 5.5 is coming in the next couple of weeks. We're also collaborating on a new offering which we call Managed Agents featuring OpenAI, which is a complete managed agent capability so customers can really easily make stateful agents and build agentic applications together with Bedrock and OpenAI. And it's really just the start of a long-term partnership that we've established together. As the teams have gotten together, we see opportunity for us to really invent new capabilities for our customers to go and build interesting applications together. And really excited about working together with the OpenAI team and unlocking more things that customers can build on AWS.
We are in a strange situation where OpenAI models can now run on AWS, but Microsoft will benefit financially because of the latest terms of their agreement. They've ended exclusivity, but OpenAI continues to make payments to Microsoft.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Oh, that's okay. Look, Microsoft has benefited from the growth of AWS since the very early days, in fact. We've supported Windows licenses, as an example, I think since 2007, 2008. I can't remember the exact year. But so Microsoft has benefited. They build great software. They have good partnerships, and they should benefit from those. But customers really want to use those technologies. SQL Server is a good example that runs great on AWS. In fact, many of our customers tell us that SQL Server runs way better on AWS than it does on Azure. And so for those customers, running in AWS is where they get the best reliability, the most security, and the broadest set of features. And so that's great. And if Microsoft benefits because their software or their partnerships or their licenses are being used inside of AWS, that's great. And in this case, we partner with Microsoft, just like we partner with Oracle and other providers that build software. And we want to make all capabilities available on AWS for people to build.
All right, really important news here, straight from the CEO, Ed Ludlow, talking with us live again on Bloomberg TV and radio. Ed, what do you make of the stock reaction here? I realize we look at Microsoft and Amazon. Amazon was up a lot coming into this today. It's down about 1%, but Microsoft is up about 1%. Are they being rewarded for distancing themselves a bit from OpenAI?
When I said that this was kind of the news hiding in plain sight, what I was specifically referring to was a post on X by Amazon's overall CEO, Andy Jassy, yesterday. So as soon as the Microsoft exclusivity ending news broke, Andy Jassy posted on X saying, well, that's very interesting. And I'm paraphrasing, but that Amazon would be expanding its relationship. That's in the short term. People have been writing for a long time that this would be the net beneficiary. Amazon would be the net beneficiary in a world where Microsoft decouples a little bit from OpenAI because they are the number one cloud computing provider. And in that interview, you heard the term Bedrock quite a lot. That is just a platform by which very large enterprise companies and other software companies can access the models. The benefit of doing so is that all of those other companies already do a lot of their computing with AWS. So if they're going to access AI models there as well, it becomes a one-stop shop. But the market sell-off of today, you guys may have touched on it already, you may touch on it more. I would just point out what he said, that demand right now is outpacing supply, because for the world, that's what they want to hear about.
Well, yeah, Ed, that's what I wanted to ask you. How do we reconcile that against the Wall Street Journal report about OpenAI not meeting its own internal targets? I know the company is pushing back. Does that mean that it shouldn't be as worrisome to financial markets as we're seeing right now?
Well, it's important to look at the specifics of what the Wall Street Journal reported, right? They talked about how OpenAI missed its own internal targets. They're their own targets. And that related to backward-looking 2025 financials, like revenue. But the figure that's in the here and now is that ChatGPT is not yet at 1 billion active users on a weekly basis. You know, ChatGPT is also a consumer-facing tool, right? Where Amazon fits into this is that they have a lens into enterprise workloads. And by that, let's not be abstract. They're talking about very large companies who have a big IT spend, and they know what the demand is there. And the commentary that from a chips perspective or a power perspective or a capacity perspective, the demand is still running ahead of supply. It's just day one for OpenAI being available on AWS, but it's a good indicator of how supply constrained that market is. And you'd think the market would see that as a good thing. It's an enviable position to be in.
As we talk about OpenAI, I've got to ask you about Sam Altman and Elon Musk. They're both in court today. It's day 2 of the trial. Understand that witnesses could be called as soon as today. Ed, will we hear both of them called to the stand? I guess would be one question. And my gosh, what could we possibly learn in discovery? The messages between these two guys could be quite a book.
Yes, it could be quite a book. I was just talking with colleagues and editors here in the newsroom. I haven't myself covered a trial since the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos trial, where I decamped to San Jose for 6 weeks. In this case, it's in Oakland. But, do you see Musk first? Do you see Sam Altman first? Those are real probabilities. We do not know. I believe Mr. Musk was photographed arriving in Oakland. Jury selection's done. I think the main thing is that you need to understand that this is a suit by Musk against Altman principally and the other co-founders of OpenAI in abandoning their original stated mission. But there's also a suit, an action against the company itself. And going through historical record of what happened at this company's founding is interesting. But the timeline, the period in between, I think you're exactly right. Learning through disclosure of documents and evidence through a witness, we'll learn a lot about how that company's changed in the last 10 years.
This is going to be rich. Ed, thank you for bringing us breaking news. This is important for our audience, and it's always great to see you. Ed Ludlow is the co-host of Bloomberg Tech with breaking news on OpenAI and Amazon. We'll be watching those stocks as we get our way through the trading session. And as we make our way closer to the King's speech, yes, indeed, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, King Charles, now at the White House, will make his way to Capitol Hill to speak to a joint session of Congress. And as we've been discussing throughout the day, there are a lot of questions about how close he might walk to the line, making some political remarks, at least geopolitical remarks, or if we'll be reading tea leaves here following what could be a 20 to 30-minute speech to both the House and Senate membership. Earlier today, it was all the pomp and circumstance of a royal visit as the president literally rolled out the red carpet at the White House. Listen.
Our ancestors would surely be filled with awe and pride that the Anglo-American Revolution in human freedom was never, ever extinguished, but carried forward across centuries, across oceans, and across history. So today we look back on 250 years. Let us remember what has made our countries the two most exceptional nations the world has ever known.
So some friendly words from President Trump as he greeted the monarch at the White House. And of course, he will do so again later this evening for the formal state dinner. But there is the congressional address in between, as Joe was just mentioning. So let's get more now as we turn to Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall, who is live on the North Lawn of the White House. So Tyler, of course, also on the schedule today is bilateral meeting between President Trump and the King. Has that wrapped up yet? Do we have any idea what conversation happened behind closed doors since the press wasn't invited into this one?
Well, Kailey, it has wrapped up, but press was not allowed inside. It did remain private as intended, and reporting indicated that that was at the request of Buckingham Palace. It is our understanding that the King is going to start to make his way over to Capitol Hill. President Trump spoke very briefly to reporters afterwards, where he said that they had a good meeting and that he has a lot of respect for the King and Queen. And that came after his remarks earlier today, where he praised the bond between the U.S. and the U.K., calling it a cherished bond. Because, of course, as you both know, this visit by the King is intended to mark 250 years of the U.S. declaring independence. But we know in the backdrop that the U.S. and the U.K. have had heightened tensions recently when it comes to differences between President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and this visit may be intended to help to smooth that relationship. In fact, it's not necessarily even in the backdrop. President Trump himself acknowledged that in an interview with the BBC last week, saying that the King's visit to the White House could, quote, absolutely repair that rift that we've been seeing. Now, when the King addresses Congress, as Joe already mentioned at the top there, we're not necessarily expecting him to be overtly political, but the palace does preview that he is going to tout the strong alliance between the two countries and highlight in particular the NATO and AUKUS military alliances amid what has been, as you both well know, Joe and Kailey, attacks by President Trump against threatening to pull out of at least the former, the NATO alliance, amid disagreements when it comes to the conflict in Iran.
Well, it's interesting, Tyler, some of the reporting that we've seen based on an early look at least some of the King's remarks. He will actually make reference to NATO. He will talk about the AUKUS nuclear defense deal. He'll talk about the war in Ukraine. I guess it's just a question of how he gets to them. Might he mention Iran, or is that a step too far?
It does seem like it's a possibility. In fact, from excerpts released by Buckingham Palace, Joe, the king is expected to say, quote, time and again, our two countries have always found ways to come together, because we know at this moment the rift between the U.S. and the U.K. really has focused on the Middle East and those allies not coming to meet President Trump's demand when it comes to securing the Strait of Hormuz, for example, and what has been some pretty stark rhetoric from some European leaders, including the German chancellor just the other day, criticizing this White House's actions when it comes to the war. So we'll see if the king ultimately ends up getting there. This is going to be a rather condensed speech, if you will. Right now, Buckingham Palace is saying it's going to go about 20 minutes. In Washington standards, it's not necessarily that long, but I think we could expect probably a likely reference there, because the backdrop, at least today for this White House, while we are talking about this foreign visit, we are still getting headlines when it comes to Iran, because at this point it does appear that progress on those negotiations remains stalled.
Well, and on the subject of Iran, Tyler, we of course heard from the president on Truth Social this morning that Iran has informed us that they are in a state of collapse. Oh, excuse me, I'm still recovering from White House Correspondents weekend. Iran is in a state of collapse, Tyler. He says they want us to open the Hormuz Strait as soon as possible. Is he alluding here to the deal that reportedly Iran had sent over that would see a reopening of the strait but a delay on talks for the nuclear program specifically?
It does feel like that, Kailey, and there is some new reporting out from CNN within the last few hours that Iran may be revising that proposal to send it over to Pakistani mediators, because the sense from the White House, including from that post from the president himself, is that they weren't very happy with the proposal by Iran, which our understanding is that we could see a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for the U.S. lifting that naval blockade and maybe making some other concessions, according to Iranian state media, such as paying for damages, compensation for damages, pledges that the U.S. wouldn't attack Iran again, and some sort of legal framework for the Strait of Hormuz. Many things that, at least publicly, have been non-starters for this White House. And perhaps the biggest sticking point here, though, is that Iran has indicated that they want to postpone negotiations and dialogue around its nuclear program. And we know that the White House says that's not going to fly for any potential deal. In fact, we had the U.S. Energy Secretary Christopher Wright on Bloomberg television earlier today saying that that is the point that the U.S. will not be able to compromise on. In fact, we've really just seen the U.S. bolster its position, too, when it comes to that naval blockade. We can say overnight there was that news that it did appear that an LNG tanker did successfully transit through the Strait of Hormuz. But Joe and Kailey, our own analysts, have said that there should be cautious optimism around that. The data that they are tracking at this point shows that, for the most part, that traffic remains at a standstill.
All right, Tyler, thank you so much. Joining us live from the White House, Tyler Kendall, ahead of not only the King's speech, but the state dinner that will take place at the White House. Still looking for the menu here, Kailey, which surely will be released later. But we'll also be looking for the toast. The press pool will be allowed into the dining room for this. And the toast is frequently something that makes the rounds on social media, right? You're going to see this in everything from People magazine to sort of lifestyle shows. And that's a way for the president to reach people that he normally could not.
Yeah, and the question is going to be, what message will he send?
That's right.
As Tyler was just running us through, what message will we get from the British monarchy? Will it be a political or geopolitical one, more so than you would typically expect, or certainly more so than we saw when the King's mother, the late Queen Elizabeth, last did an address to Congress like this, all the way back in 1990.
That's right. I don't think they'll be singing American Pie at this state dinner. That took place a couple of months ago. We'll have our panel up next, only on Bloomberg.
We here at Balance of Power are bringing you the latest from Washington, which, of course, is waiting with bated breath for the address to a joint session of Congress that will be given by King Charles just over an hour and a half from now. He will be addressing the chambers, which, of course, could have a very different composition a short time from now after the midterm elections in November, not just because of a potential shift in the balance of power here in Washington, but because there are dozens of members who currently sit in the House of Representatives who have decided not to seek re-election for another term. And crossing just moments ago, we add another member to that list. Republican Congressman Daniel Webster of Florida announces he has decided not to seek re-election. And this is especially interesting, Joe, as this is the former Speaker of the Florida House who was opposed to the redistricting effort that is now being pursued by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, which, of course, is a redrawing of the congressional districts to potentially net Republicans 4 more seats. Congressman Webster, who, of course, will soon no longer be a congressman, has suggested that redistricting is a, quote, slippery slope.
Well, as you're connecting the dots on all the stories here, funny how they come together like this, because Republicans in the Florida legislature are taking up the new maps today, new congressional maps, remembering that Virginia did its own just a couple of weeks ago that gave at least nationally Democrats a +1 advantage. This map would give Republicans an edge in 4 seats now held by Democrats. So to what extent this changes the equation remains a question. And if, in fact, Ron DeSantis can push this through. At one time, not a great friend of Donald Trump, but he seems to be doing what the president wants here.
Yeah, rejoining in the redistricting wars that, of course, began in Texas and have reverberated far beyond the Lone Star State. But the question, of course, for Ron DeSantis in the aftermath of what we have seen in special elections all across the country as well was whether or not you risk dummy mandering through these gerrymanders because of an erosion of the coalition that elected Donald Trump and Republicans largely into the majorities last go-around in 2024.
Or it just could be a fizzle where it's a wash in the end. And after all of this effort, all the money, think of Prop 50 in California, all the hand-wringing in Texas, that you end up with the same balance you had before. Let's see what the panel thinks. Kailey, Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, Republican strategist, partner at Stonecourt Capital. Are you still rolling your eyes, Jeanne, like when we came out of Virginia, or does Ron DeSantis give Republicans the leg up?
Still rolling my eyes, no surprise. But I do think, Kailey mentioned dummy mandering. That is, of course, a big question mark. Does all of this backfire on the GOP? But another idiosyncrasy, if you could put it that way, of the state of Florida is that they have a amendment, a fair district amendment. And that says that they are not supposed to be redrawing maps for partisan reasons. And this is why I question the number 4 that he went after. We had talked about, well, maybe he'll go after 2, maybe 3. But the bigger the number, the harder it is for them in court to argue that this is not partisan. Of course, we all know it's partisan, but the harder it becomes. And so I think that's another aspect of this that we have to look at is the sort of maximalist, as I know Rick called it, aggressive way in which he's done this. Does that backfire on them in court because of this amendment?
Well, so Rick, weigh in here as Jeanne's talking about the potentially partisan nature of this. Of course, the Florida governor maintains that this is just a realignment due to population growth and an undercounting in the 2020 census. Call it what you want here, I guess. But do you think he might be making a mistake?
Yeah, it's really doubtful. I've been saying for quite some time that this effort to redistrict in midterm is a fool's errand. One, because you had to assume the Democrats were going to react to it, and they have, and so there's no real advantage today. But 2, we've been watering down perfectly good Republican districts all along the way. And in a season where the Democrats have a huge advantage going into the midterms, the last thing you want to do is water down what otherwise would have been safer seats. Democrats have been winning in districts that have plus 17 Republican histories to them. And if you apply those to these new districts, goodbye, fellas. 4 more Republicans going down because we made the mistake of midterm redistricting.
Boy, well, I don't know if it impacts the balance of power in the midterms here, Jeanne. We're told that money is extremely lopsided in favor of Republicans right now. How would those two rationalize each other?
Yeah, and of course, Donald Trump, he has an enormous amount of money. And one of the sort of big questions about the Virginia case was why didn't the Republicans spend more in that case? So I think we have to see if they feel the need to spend in the Florida case. There was a big story on the front page of the New York Times talking about what a difficult midterm this is looking like it's going to be. We've all talked about that before for Republicans. Money can help that, but it may not be enough. And another wrinkle in this whole story is, of course, we are waiting for the Supreme Court to issue a really important ruling on the Voting Rights Act. If they do that and it goes in a direction that leads to redistricting in the South, this Florida redistricting may not be the end of the redistricting wars, because you may see states like Colorado and New York, who have these ballot initiatives, jump back into this fray. And so there's a whole lot that can happen even before November. And, so far, to Rick's point, this has been sort of a tit for tat and nobody has come out ahead. I suspect that's where we're headed now, but there's a lot of money being spent and a lot of energy focused still on redistricting across the country.
Well, and of course, when we consider where all of this is headed, Rick, it is an attempt by both sides to try to guarantee that they can retain or get control of the House majority after November. That said, having the House majority sometimes isn't all it's cracked up to be, as it can be very difficult to keep that majority together, especially when it is as narrow of a majority as the one that House Speaker Mike Johnson is dealing with right now, including, as evidenced just yesterday, around the issue of FISA reauthorization of Section 702, key intelligence gathering powers that have been given that the administration argues is vital to stopping terrorism threats here in the United States. He can't seem to get alignment with conservatives on this. This couldn't get out of the Rules Committee yesterday. They had to adjourn. Maybe they're going to try again today, Rick. But how do you think the Speaker finds his way out of this one? Is the solution actually not going to be found in the House, but the Senate jamming something down the House's throat?
I mean, at some point, the Speaker's got to take a look at this and say, you know what, I am tired of living in this caucus. We don't get anything done. It's the least productive caucus in modern history. And he's got plenty of Democratic votes who'd be willing to vote on the FISA deal. And so, when are we going to just start doing bipartisan deals? He can't get this bill through. He's got 10 members who have already said we're not voting for this bill, yet he keeps bringing it up, for a vote. I mean, it's just stupefying to me that our country is being held hostage by caucus politics. The more power that Johnson could have would be cutting a deal with Democrats, passing these bills, getting that agriculture bill done, getting the FISA deal done, and starting to act like a powerful speaker who doesn't have to be held captive by 10 people in the Freedom Caucus. I mean, honestly, I scratch my head every time I see this replayed, and it's been done over and over again, why anybody would be allowed to be holding hostage the most powerful man in Congress.
Well, Rick's really getting to it here, Jeanne. Would there be 10 or a dozen Democrats willing to vote for FISA renewal to make the difference, or would Speaker Johnson have to compromise on something I'm not thinking of? What's the Democratic amendment that would make this pass the House?
I think you may get 10. He may have to compromise a bit. And there's a lot that Democrats would like him to compromise on. We are still looking at DHS being closed. We're still looking at the issue of ICE. I mean, the list goes on and on. But, the reality is that Speaker Johnson is a weak speaker, and Donald Trump is the actual Speaker of the House. That's how this thing has played out for so long. And what is perplexing about the entire FISA debate is these are the same debates we had in 24. They're the same concerns that have been expressed. The White House waited till March, almost April, to try to push this forward. The president, as far as we can tell, has not been pushing for this. He needs to get on the phone and make this happen. Unfortunately, he is the one that can move this House. Mike Johnson can't. And that's been shown repeatedly. It's been when the president got on the phone. The only question mark on that is, does the president's low approval ratings and plummeting numbers make these caucus members in the Freedom Caucus and elsewhere feel like, hey, we don't want to listen to this guy. He doesn't have support either. Then they've got a real problem. But I suspect that it's going to be up to the president and the White House to push this through. But there are Democrats who would support it. Listen, FISA is very important to our security, and we are in a time of war.
Well, just quickly, Rick, in our final minute here, do you think we are approaching the point where the arm twisting, even from President Trump, is no longer as effective?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point Jeanne makes. The closer we get to the midterms, the uglier the polling data, and it's just getting uglier and uglier, whether it's the president's approval or Democratic advantage over Republicans in re-election to the Congress, more Republican retirements, as we pointed out. It's going to be every man for himself at some point, and it may be that point now. Change into the summer is awful hard. Everybody who's normal goes on vacation. These members want to have a conversation with their constituents. Whoops, too late. You can't have it at the beach. So I think right now you see the characteristics of, like every man for himself, do what you can to save yourself, and to heck with the caucus.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our political panel and Bloomberg Politics contributors, joining us today on Balance of Power. Thank you both so much. And we still have more ahead, as joining us up next will be the Finance Minister of Ontario. We got to talk tariffs and also Canada's new sovereign wealth fund. That's ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio.
And you can't separate the two when it comes to the energy markets, as we've made clear over the past 7 or 8 weeks with the standoff in the Strait of Hormuz. We are watching oil prices in New York back to triple digits. There it is, $100 a barrel for West Texas Intermediate. Brent was already well on its way. It's at $111. They're both up. Well, I guess Brent's up 3% now. WTI is up 4% with no break in sight, and gas prices are moving higher as well. The latest from AAA today on a national average, $4.17 a gallon. Could there be an inflection point coming? Kailey, this is a fascinating story that you can read about on the terminal, that Iran is running out of oil storage, and they're getting to the point now where they have to start reloading tankers, and those tankers are now lined up in the Gulf in front of the U.S. blockade. At a certain point, they will have to start putting this oil in barrels, in tanks. They might start taking it by train to China, and then they might have to start closing wells. And this is why we have this waiting game underway here to see who blinks first. Michael McGlone, of course, from Bloomberg Intelligence, our senior commodity analyst, joins us right now with his take on what's going on. Mike, we've got around 6 to 8 super tankers just idling there, laden with oil, and it looks like they're going to be loading up a lot more. Does this waiting game favor the United States?
Oh, absolutely, Joe. The price maker status has switched in the world from the Middle East to the Western Hemisphere, centered on the U.S. And the U.S. is accumulating with Canada a surplus near 8 million barrels a day of crude oil and liquid fuels that it has to export now. And what just happened today with the UAE leaving OPEC is adding to my view that we're probably going to get towards $50 a barrel in WTI crude oil by the time we get to midterms. That's partly because what crude oil does, you're seeing it today. I think we're near the upper end of the range in WTI, near $100 a barrel. It's breaking stuff, breaking the global economy. And if the stock market goes down, it's going to do what it did in 2008. It went to 147. By then, the year is 32.
Well, let's talk more about the UAE leaving OPEC after, 6 decades? Mike, the justification is in part the disruption from the war and the shortages it caused that they say is going to require agility to respond to market demands. They don't want to have to coordinate their response with the cartel, which can be something of a laborious process. But I wonder, as we consider what the market demands are actually going to look like, what kind of response you do think the UAE and the producers still in OPEC are going to have to be calibrating?
Well, so, Kailey, add to the UAE, Venezuela, and Canada, all the way down to Argentina. There's a lot of incentive for more supply. At the same time, we're seeing demand destruction. But what you see there is a paradigm shift in what the cartel did. It pumped up prices too high. It helped support Landman and bring all that supply to the U.S. And now that cartel is redundant. It doesn't really do its job anymore. And the UAE is saying, hey, let's just take advantage as long as we can and bring on more supply. So they've been exporting around 3 million barrels a day. They can easily bump that up to 5. And they have access to the Gulf of Oman. They don't have to be stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. But if you've also seen that in futures, what's happening today, now you're quoting front month futures and Brent, that's around 110. That's the June contract, which is going to expire on Thursday. But if you go out to June 2027, it's actually down on the day. It's down at $79 a barrel. The market's looking forward to all that supply.
Just quickly, Mike, we're going to talk in a moment, I'm glad to say, with the Minister of Finance from the province of Ontario. We talk a lot about the extent to which this is helping to enrich U.S. interests as an oil exporter. What does this mean for Canada?
Oh, same thing. U.S. and Canada combined, that's 8 million barrels a day. But major exporters, just a lot of that Canadian crude has to come down through the Gulf to get out. Now, they've put on other alternatives, maybe through the West Coast. But major suppliers of crude oil, not just that, biofuels via grains, corn, soybeans, wheat, canola up in Canada. And they're having problems with demand. Now, fertilizer is a bit of an issue, but there's a lot of supply in that space from U.S. and Canada in food and energy.
All right. Bloomberg Intelligence senior commodity strategist Mike McGlone joining us from Miami, all the way down south. Thank you very much. But it is north to Canada that we go next, although he's joining us from our world headquarters in New York. But the finance minister of Ontario, Peter Bethlenfalvy, is joining us now here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Minister, welcome back. It's great to have you on Balance of Power. If we could just continue the conversation on the energy shock emanating from the Middle East due to the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. How is Ontario, Canada, feeling the ripple effects of that shock already? And how is it affecting your outlook as finance minister?
Well, great to be with you again. Great to be here in New York. You're in Washington. Great to see you. It has a double-edged effect. Clearly, you just heard that for Canada, we were a big oil-producing nation, big agriculture, fertilizer, potash, all those things. Great. But we're feeling it in Ontario at the pumps. That's where we feel it. And it'll flow through to the supply chain if this persists. I think that's an impact. So mixed emotions about the price of oil right now.
Interesting. What is an average gallon of gas for you, Minister? We're at $4.17 today. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it is. I spent 2 decades of my life here in New York, so very familiar. Not that high. It's $1.70 a liter. I haven't quite figured out the conversion between liters and gallons, but we're roughly the same.
On that here.
We're roughly the same, and we feel the pinch at the pumps. We cut the gas tax in Ontario. We're a government that cuts taxes. So 4 years ago, we cut the gas tax. So it's diminishing the impact somewhat, over 10 cents a liter, but still, or the equivalent at the pumps in the U.S. in terms of gallons. But it affects the price of everything, and affordability is an issue.
Well, just like it is here in the United States, and an issue that, of course, has only sharpened due to the war with Iran, which, as we were just discussing with Mike, has seemingly reordered and perhaps structurally so global energy markets and energy producers like those in the Gulf states. And, of course, the energy production we have seen in the Middle East has empowered many of those GCC countries to have massive sovereign wealth funds that they can use to invest in other areas, be it technology or here in the United States or what have you. We learned yesterday, Minister, and you well know this, that Canada is now getting into the sovereign wealth fund game. This was announced by Prime Minister Mark Carney yesterday, giving essentially the Canada Strong Fund seeded with $18.4 billion from the federal government. What's your reaction? What's your role in this, if any?
Well, we have our own that we launched about 4 months ago, or a couple of months ago. So we're going in the same direction. If you think about what we're doing in Canada right now is major projects, big infrastructure. So that doesn't just mean a pipeline to the west to build more supply to markets in Asia, Southeast Asia, but also pipelines up through the north, through the Arctic, and east through Ontario. We import a lot of our oil from the Middle East in eastern Canada, and it gets refined in eastern Canada. We'd like to ship American and Canadian oil into those refineries. And, of course, we're shipping a lot into the U.S. We're a big exporter of oil into the U.S. So we're your largest import market for energy. So this will help fund those major projects, tens of billions of capital required to do that.
Interesting. Looking at the size and scale, for instance, looking at Norway's fund, which is in the area of $2 trillion. You mentioned $18 billion. How much could this grow?
I think it could grow exponentially. And if you think about Canada, I mean, what we have up in Canada, your previous guest talked about oil and gas. We got an abundance of that. Yeah. We also have an abundance of agricultural products. He mentioned that as well. But I would add critical minerals, rare earths. We have all the minerals that the world needs for technology. And that's from a safety of supply, security of supply, and we have abundance of those minerals. So all these things, I think, are going to really add to not only the safety and security of the North American continent, I would add, but also from an economic prosperity point of view.
Well, and Minister, you mentioned Ontario's own version of this, the Protect Ontario Account Investment fund. Have you found a private sector asset manager for that yet?
No, we're in the process of doing that. They're a couple months into the process, so hopefully conclude that shortly. But what that really is we have an incredible amount of entrepreneurs in Canada. We have tremendous support from U.S. investors and investors around the globe. We just want to make sure that Canadian investors, we have some of the largest pension funds in the world, are based in Toronto and in Canada, to put more of that capital to work in the growth areas. We mentioned energy. We're talking oil and gas, but Ontario has a massive footprint of nuclear energy. Over 50% of our province generates the electricity in Ontario. And by the way, I was in Midtown yesterday, and one company said, You're powering our building here from Ontario. So we ship electricity out of Ontario. We're also going to be big in defense industry. We're going from 2% of GDP to 5%. And on a Canadian $3 trillion economy, that's another 90 billion Canadian, or about 65, 70 billion US per annum. So a lot of growth opportunities, and that's part of our strategy with our version of the Wealth Fund.
Minister Bethlenfalvy, and I don't mean to interrupt, when you start increasing defense spending at a time like this in Canada, are you intentionally looking around the world for defense contractors to meet those needs? And by that, I mean looking away from U.S. contractors?
No, it's not either or. It's all of the above. I mean, the U.S. is our closest friend and ally and economic partner. Yeah, we're going to go through a negotiation on the USMCA deal with the Section 232s, but we're always going to have a very firm, long-standing economic relationship with the U.S., and that includes defense. I'm very confident of that. But, the president and others have said, you got to do more, and Canada's answering that challenge. So we're going to 5%. There'll be a lot of domestic, not just manufacturing, but drones and cyber technology. We've got to protect the North as well, the Arctic. So we're doing our share, and that's going to be a big growth industry for us in Canada.
Well, you mentioned the economic relationship between the U.S. and Canada, Minister, which, of course, has been rocked by President Trump's tariff policies ahead of what could be a renegotiation of the USMCA trade agreement. What is your understanding of the status of that right now, and what position Canada is bringing in terms of relative strength to those potential renegotiations, given everything that has gone on since President Trump came back into office?
Well, we're not only friends and allies and a long shared history together, but there's economic interests on both sides of the border. We're stronger together. I think we do I'll do in Canadian dollars, 360 billion of trade a year, so $1 billion a day. 1.8 million Americans wake up every day to work on something that gets shipped to Ontario. And I think we're the number one or two, 26 states we're their number one or two trading partner. And if we were a country, we'd be in Ontario, the 20th largest. So there's economic interests on both sides of the border. We have a lot of natural resources up in Canada that the U.S. We trade with, and obviously the U.S. has a lot of attributes too for us to be able to sell into. So there's a lot of mutual commercial interest to, I think, get a deal done, and we'll work it out with our neighbors.
Mark Carney has said that Canada will not rush a tariff deal with the U.S. In our remaining moment, Minister, do you approve of that approach?
Yeah, I think we want to get a deal that's good for both sides. And I think there is a deal, but through any negotiations, there's pre-positioning and what have you. I'll be in Washington tomorrow meeting a number of people from Congress. The dialogue, the two-way flow of information is essential. So, look, I'm an optimist, and I think just by force of geography and nature, culture, language, all those things, we're gonna get through this together.
Well, we wish you luck on your travels and your meetings with Congress. He is Minister of Finance from Ontario, with us from World Headquarters in New York, Peter Bethlenfalvy. We thank you so much for the conversation. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington alongside Kailey Leinz, and we'll have a lot more to talk about on the late edition of Balance of Power. That will be after King Charles' speech to a joint session of Congress, which Kailey's about to get going an hour from now.
Indeed, 3 p.m. Eastern is when that is scheduled. We'll hear from the British monarch potentially a little bit more about politics than you would typically expect. And of course, after his speech, he will look forward to a state dinner at the White House this evening. It's a lot to cover, and we will do so when we reconvene with you at 5 p.m. for the late edition right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.